Hello, everyone. I'm Leah Toms from the marketing team, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, all about your next steps preparing for 47-day TLS. I have Tim Callan and Nick France here for you today. As always, this presentation is being recorded, and we'll share it with you afterwards, most likely tomorrow. Finally, if you've got any questions during the presentation, send them our way. Please use the Q&A function, and we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end. Nick and Tim, let's go.
Thank you so much, Leah. Hi, Nick.
Thanks, Leon. Hey, Tim. How are you?
Good. So I think probably everybody who's on the webinar knows this, but of course, in the month of March, the CA Browser Forum passed a ballot that would step the maximum term of a public TLS certificate down to 47 days by 2029. And this has gotten a lot of attention from our customers and partners and people who want to understand the details and know what to do about it. So in this case, we're going to, excuse me, on this webinar, we're going to share the details of that and then talk about specifically what your action plan should look like. So here's what we want to talk about, or here's what it looks like, right? First of all, we're just going to go over what's happening with certificate lifespans. And then this is the suggested action plan that we have. Think about this as a number of steps between now and March of 2026. March of 2026 being the day that your, or the month specifically, that your maximum TLS term will drop down to 200 days, 6 months, which is the first in the series of step downs. And along the way, we have a set of milestones you want to think about. August, fall, winter, spring, and where you want to be in the process of getting ready for this occurrence. So Nick and I will walk you through those milestones, those steps, and then we're going to talk about what the future looks like moving forward. So with that, let's start with what's going on with TLS certificate lifespans. So a little recap of what happened. In 2023, in March of 2023, Google Chrome started all of this. And on a website it calls Moving Forward Together, it threw down the gauntlet to say we would like to see certificates migrated down to, at the time they said 90 days maximum term. And that began a lot of very earnest discussion in the industry among how this would happen, if this would happen, what it would look like. And that discussion went on for years, 2 years, right? And what happened is last summer, Apple put out a concrete proposal that would over time reduce the maximum term of TLS cert until eventually it wound up at, originally it was 45 days, but it wound up at 47 days. And this too went through a lot of discussion, a lot of modification, changed a lot from the original proposal. But on April 11, 2025, the CA Browser Forum passed a ballot that would actually step down. And again, we'll show you the details of what that looks like on this webinar. And then there was a 1 month, what they call an IP review period. It's part of the process in CA Browser Forum. That passed, and on May 13, this ballot went into effect. So this is now a real effective ballot. This is coming, and it is going to be the future maximum term that everybody gets to live with. But before we do that, why are we doing this at all? Nick, why are we doing this at all?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Tim. A lot of people are asking that, why are we doing it? And this is one of the reasons why there was a lot of discussion over the past couple of years, why there was a lot of discussion on the ballot itself, and why there was an extended discussion period with the ballot, because normally the discussion period doesn't last quite as long as it did this one. So I think it's good to, I think it's good this to address a little bit of why it is. And these are some of the bullet points here. I mean, I think the overall point I make to people is shorter is better in this case, because the less amount of time something bad is out there, the better. And what we mean by something bad is we're talking about a misissued or a compromised certificate sometimes, a compromised private key, a certificate with incorrect data in, a certificate that hasn't been validated properly, the kind of certificate that can cause a problem. The less time that is out there, the better. And doing that, reducing this lifetime down so that the maximum lifetime is 47 days and not the 10 or 15 years that we used to be able to offer makes the process makes us all safer. It makes the internet safer, and it makes us all, safer as a result of moving towards these shorter lifetimes. So I think that's what we mean by enhanced security. We're making everything
Right.
safer by reducing these lifetimes.
Right. Yeah. Now, another one is that, of course, we're moving into an era where crypto agility has become more important than ever. And the whole post-quantum cryptography exercise is an example of that. How we're all going to be swapping out our algorithms for new algorithms because the old algorithms are just unsafe. And this isn't unprecedented. This has happened before, and the probably the best example of it was moving away from a SHA-1. So once upon a time, we used the SHA-1 signature algorithm, and people felt good about it. And after a while, it was deemed that SHA-1 was not secure. And when that happened, CAs were given a certain amount of time to phase out their SHA-1, and the deadline was set. And that deadline came, and at that point, the maximum term for a TLS cert was still 3 years. And so literally, there were certs that were validly issued, the day before the deadline for 3 years. And then 3 years later, these certs were still out there in the wild, and they were not misissued certificates. They were perfectly compliant certificates using an algorithm that at that point essentially had been deprecated 4 years prior. And this was, I think, a wake-up call for a lot of people in the industry, especially browsers, who just said, this is not okay. We need more agility than this. And one of the the main offender in the lack of agility was certificate term. So that also, they put their eyes on reducing the certificate term.
Yep. I think the SHA-1, SHA-2 thing that you mentioned there, Tim, is obviously the big driver. But we've seen other changes. We've seen certain certificate types have to increase their key sizes. We know that these algorithms that we all rely on for this are, they're under attack, or they're under scrutiny, certainly.
Yeah.
Computers get faster, new mathematical techniques get invented. I don't think we'll touch on it too much this
There
time,
were
but we always
problems like
talk about
Heartbleed and the Debian vulnerability and all of these things
exactly.
demand agility in our certificates.
Yeah, and we know we've got a big one that's potentially coming at some point in the future that we don't know about, which is obviously the idea of a quantum computer and being able to break these algorithms upon which we rely very, very easily and very, very quickly. And if we were at a point doing, 1, 2, 3, 5 year certificates, and then a viable quantum computer comes along, we can't wait 5 years for that to be cycled out. We can't wait 5 years for it to be replaced. If it's on a cadence of 47 days, then maybe that short period is a bit more acceptable in the grand scheme of things. Maybe we go shorter if we can. But the idea of reducing that window from multi-year down to several days is obviously going to give us benefits when we have to change these standards quickly.
Right. And then probably the last big one here, I think, that we've seen is this, there's been this resistance in the market to the adoption of automated solutions around certificate management. Really kind of a surprising resistance in many ways. And the browsers have been pretty explicit in saying all of the evidence indicates that automation of certificate management is a net positive for everybody involved. Reliability goes up, predictability goes up, security goes up. The amount of workload goes down, the opportunity for error goes down, and there is a belief that the reason that the browser that automation has not been more thoroughly adopted is because people are able to just put it off. And it's kind of a chicken egg problem. And once there is a clear roadmap for reduction of lifespans, then that will give IT departments the power they need, the evidence they need to prioritize the adoption of these things that are going to be healthy for them anyway.
Yeah, Yeah, I think the last line says it best, Tim. It's the
Right.
adoption of best practices.
Yeah.
Automating anything is a best practice. It's been possible for a long time with certificates. I think, as you've suggested there, while it's been possible, it hasn't been adopted by everybody. It hasn't been adopted as widely as perhaps we and the browsers would like. So forcing this change through guideline and regulation changes, makes people have to start adopting these
Yeah.
technologies and best practices to make everything more automated and ultimately make us all safer.
And I think you'd agree, Nick. We talk to a lot of like in the trenches people who want to do this, and the problem they have is that they can't get it prioritized kind of at the, at the C level or the boardroom level.
Yeah, that's
And this
a
becomes a
common issue.
tool
Yeah.
for them, right? This becomes an enabler for those people to go make the changes that they know their organization needs to make.
I mean, I think
All
a
right.
lot of people forget as well, Tim, is that TLS and certificates fundamentally underpins massive parts of the internet, right? Well,
Yeah.
all of the internet. It's security for everybody, and whether that's just you going to a website versus you logging into your email versus doing a mortgage application over the internet, the underlying security there is TLS, and it needs focus. It needs the security it provides. It needs that to be improved, but it needs the focus. People often don't, so we end up in these situations you say where
Yeah.
best practices and automation is adopted. So this is going to force that, and that's one of the main reasons to do it.
Yeah. And the reason it's going to force it really is risk of outage, right? So, at the end of the day, every certificate expires. And if they start expiring more quickly, then it's more likely for that to be a problem. And let's be clear, this is a problem that occurs a lot. So I'm not going to belabor this slide, but this is a slide we have where we go through every one of these things is an outage of a major technology brand. These aren't your corner pizza shop. These are the people who can get this right. And it's an outage of a major technology brand that occurred and has been attributed to an error with certificates. And look at
Yep.
who we have here: Microsoft, Spotify, LinkedIn, Cisco, Starlink, Ericsson, right? These
And
are
these are just the big ones,
ServiceNow,
right?
Fortinet. These are just the big ones. And these are just the ones we know.
Yeah.
Most of the time, you don't know why an outage occurred. And I'm actually very confident that there are many, many, many of these where the root cause is just never told to the public.
I think you and I do that though, don't we, Tim? Whenever we see some major IT thing in the news,
Yeah.
we're usually messaging each other in the morning, wondering if
Say,
anybody
hey,
knows
I
if it
wonder,
was
I wonder if that
an
was a
expiring
certificate.
cert.
Right.
Exactly,
Right.
because
And
it is
so,
a root cause for a lot of these, outages, as you say, that we might not know about. These are the ones we do know about. These are the ones that made the news, but
yeah.
there's likely to be a lot more.
Yeah. And if these guys are vulnerable, these born in the cloud, infinitely resourced, best of breed technology companies are vulnerable, what it tells me is that everybody's vulnerable. And
Yes.
that's what we need to deal with. So, what is our practical deadline ready action plan? What do we recommend you do? So, here's your first milestone. By August 2025, we recommend that you need to know your inventory. You cannot secure what you can't see. So, this is the discovery phase. This is the phase where you need to find all of those certificates, not just the certificates that you're buying officially through the official certificate management department that rolls up to the CIO, but also those rogue certificates that are being bought by other departments or technically savvy individuals or folks in the development team that you only find out about when they expire and things stop working. This is time to find those, and as many or all of them as you can, so that you know what you're dealing with and you know what needs to be automated and you know what's moving to the new agenda.
Yep. I think the other thing to say with inventory, Tim, is obviously there's a lot of available tools to do it out there. There's open source ones, there's ones from CAs like us and other CAs, and there's even vendors who do certificate management and specifically include discovery tools in there. I think a good point to mention here, though, is it's good to know everything you have. It's good to have the full inventory of all your certificates, public and private, because that's what these tools can do. They can find your public certs and they can find your private certs. I think one thing just to mention, although I assume most people know it, but we'll say it anyway, these regulations are around public certificates. Okay, so inventory is great, and you will have all of your private certs in there as well. And I don't think either Tim or I or anyone would discourage you from automating those if you haven't already. But do understand that these requirements by the industry and the CAB forum and the browsers are specifically for publicly trusted certificates. So you don't necessarily need to reduce your private down. Yeah,
So
we just
your
want to be clear.
S-MIMEs and your other certificate types are separate. Now they're going through their own certificate reduction process as well, because that's happening everywhere. But this development is for server TLS certs real specifically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So yes. So know what you have, right? That's first start. If you don't know what you have, you can't automate it, you can't protect it, you can't rely on it, and nobody does, right? So know what you have. Then you, after August, your next step getting into the fall is understand your automation needs. So, these lifespans are going to go down, and they're going to go all the way down to the point where it's a monthly asset. So now at this point, now that you know where your certificates are, you need to ask, what environments are they on? What are they doing? What processes are they enabling for us? And you need to go through and systematically ask yourself, how am I going to automate this? How am I
Yep.
going to make this automated? And we'll get back to which ones are higher priorities and which ones are lower priorities.
Yep.
And
You
yeah,
absolutely need to do this kind of assessment to figure it out. We've got a chart we'll talk about in a minute, right, Tim, about
yeah,
which are the higher priorities, which are the lower. I think a couple of things I would say here is number one, and I've said this to a lot of customers as well over the past few years, is we would love everybody to be at 100% automation. We'd love everybody to look at their certificate estate, their IT infrastructure, and go, you know what, I can automate 100% of this. And in many cases, that's possible. But I also think sometimes that is a goal. You're letting perfect be the enemy of good. There might
sure.
be some
Agreed.
systems that you cannot automate. You might be a financial institution with some really old mainframe things still running COBOL to process a lot of stuff. We know they exist. It might not be automatable, and that's okay. We'll talk in a minute about where to focus
Yeah.
and where to look at later. But an extension of that I do want to mention, Tim, is one of the things that you could do with this when you're evaluating your automation needs is also to put a little bit of thought into whether what you're looking at, especially if it's paying to automate or you don't feel you can automate it, is it an appropriate use case for a publicly trusted TLS certificate?
At all.
Does
Yes.
this big internal system running on a 3-decade-old mainframe only talks to one other part of our infrastructure? Is there really a need to have a certificate on there, which is the same one I might put on my blog about cats and dogs? Because that's the reality here. And I think that assessment needs to be part of this to make sure that people are actually using the right technology. Because what you don't want to do is try and shoehorn some automation in where it might never work because you feel it needs a publicly trusted cert that's going
Right.
down to 47 days when it may in fact not. So this evaluation is your automation needs as a whole.
Yeah.
Can I automate it? How do I automate it? Does it even need a public certificate that has to be automated?
I agree with that. Now, just to make a little bit of trouble here, Nick, I agree with all of that. At the same time, if you're looking at this business critical system and saying, you know what, I can put private PKI on here, and I'm going to, because that way I'm going to get around these pesky maximum term requirements, you need to also understand that the benefits that we went over of the maximum term requirements apply to everything. And you're absorbing extra risk when you do that.
Oh
And
yeah,
you have to
yeah.
have an eyes open decision to say, I know I'm absorbing this extra risk. I'm okay with that. I think it's the right thing to do, and I'm going to proceed. But let's not do it just because we can't be bothered. Let's do it
Yes,
because we're confident that it really is the best holistic decision for the organization.
you're right. So it is that's evaluation, and I think that's an absolutely valid point. Is
Right.
don't just not do it because you can't or it's hard. Because you
Right.
do get benefits from automating and I would also say a lot of private certificates and internal PKI does tend to be very automated anyway. But I think the evaluate this lifetime change and what we're talking about here, this evaluation will force people to assess, do I have the right certificate in the right place? And it's not
Yes.
necessarily a case of should I automate it or should I not? Because like you said, Tim, that's not really a choice we want people to make. I want people to make the choices, does this need a public cert or not? And that's I think where people need to have a look as part of this general evaluation as to what they have. So you've got to find out what you've got, you've got to evaluate how you're using it, and then we'll go on to the next step.
Next step. So let's go on to the next step. So there you go. Again, August, know your inventory. Fall, evaluate your automation needs. By winter, You need an implementation plan. So this is where it's coming. So winter is decision time, as we say here. So now that you understand where your certs are, now you understand what your options are for automation and how difficult and easy it's going to be, you need to go and you need to actually say, okay, this is the roadmap. This is what I'm going to execute on so that I have this done by March 15th. Or not, but I know I'm not, right? March 15 is that magic date.
Yeah.
And when we do that, one of the things I think is really important is prioritization. So this is an oversimplified version of what the real decision matrix looks like, but we're basically looking at this. We say, how critical is it and how difficult is it? And this is a simple, again, easy, hard, low, high, right? It would, in reality, it's much, much more nuanced than that. But just going with this, right? I can look at these 4 quadrants and I have a good understanding of what I need to do, right? So high criticality, easy, do it. That's the one you do for sure. That's the one you do first. Get that done. Get that out of the way and do it now, right? Difficult and low criticality. I've got some homegrown, home-baked system that's doing something that isn't really all that important. And in the event that it stopped working, there would be a kind of inconvenient but perfectly doable manual task that we would be able to jump on until we got it fixed, or things would wait 3 days and it would be fine. That's a low criticality one. If that's difficult, you save that for last. And then those low criticality but easy ones, probably want to get those done because they're easy. Those high criticality but hard ones, well, they're high criticality. You want to work on that. And so just think about these two factors when you're evaluating your roadmap, to say, what am I going to do first? What am I going to do second? What am I going to do after March 15, 2026? That lower left quadrant.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
I think the other factor here, Tim, as well, with prioritizing as well, is there is obviously some reliance in some cases on external parties, vendors particularly, right? And I think that's part of this general the assessment and the comparing vendors and planning your implementation in this stage. Because when this started being talked about, as you said, 2 years ago, Tim, with Google's moving forward together, and even prior to that, when we moved down from 2 to 1 years, when Acme was created and Let's Encrypt came around, there was a lot of hope, I think, certainly on my part, I'm sure yours as well, Tim, and others, is that Acme and more automation would be adopted perhaps much more widely than it is today. So prioritizing systems that have the automation built in, that obviously makes it easier than something that doesn't have an option. You have to speak to the vendor. But I also think these changes that were now, official as of yesterday, will mean that a lot more vendors are going to start taking this automation more seriously, integrating it native into your platforms, and that should be factored into this prioritization you're doing, right? So if you have a system that's critical,
and it's not on a slide, but that's a great point, which is you are the customer. You buy from these vendors. You have the opportunity to move. So if they don't support the automation you need, you may want to think about changing providers. And if you're thinking about changing providers, you may want to tell them that you're thinking about changing providers, because miracle of miracles, it might turn out that supporting your automation suddenly becomes a high priority roadmap item.
Exactly that. And I think it will. I think we will see now. It's something that we've been talking about for a long time. You and I, but also a lot of other people, about this automation. And, it's only just now, less than 24 hours ago, official and materialized and there. And these vendors are now going to have to start moving. And as Tim, as you said, you as a subscriber, you as a customer, need to do this assessment, and you need to prioritize these systems. And some of that will have the factor of, what does my vendor support? Have I told my vendor I need this support? Can I tell them I need it in the next quarter? Otherwise, I'm going to look for alternatives. And those things should absolutely be done, because that's, again, it's going to make us all safer. The more vendors support things like Acme as a first party solution, or even have some kind of basic solution like an API to do automation of a certificate on a platform or an appliance or a piece of software. But that will factor into the prioritization I think I wanted to say on this slide, because if it's something, it's going to make it harder if there is no support for automation in the product from your vendor. So you're going to need to push them and get it to make it easy, because it should be. And any product that uses certificates should have an option for automation today, or be able to do it very easily. That's the reality.
And I think I agree with all that, Nick. I want to do a little bit of a yes and. And the yes and is yes to all of the above. Also, I remember, and I was interested to observe that when this Apple proposal first came out last year, there were these big active threads full of lots of people on places like Reddit talking about it. And something you saw very frequently went as follows. Poster would come in and say, look, I'd love to do this, but I can't do automation because the platform I use doesn't support it, and it is XYZ platform. And then you'd receive a reply from someone else to say, actually, it does do automation, and here's the link proving it. And so where I'm going with this is the fact that maybe you couldn't automate this the last time you looked into it 4 years ago doesn't mean you can't automate it now. Or the fact that you were told by some graybeard in the department that you can't automate it doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually true. And so I'm going to encourage everybody here not to go on folk wisdom or your vague memory of the last time you tried, but to really go out and earnestly look factually for information about your automation options for the platforms you find, because I think that many of us on this webinar are going to find that we have more and better automation options than we thought.
Yes, completely agree, Tim. There's more out there than people think. I think there's cases where I wish there was more than people think, but
yes,
the whole point of this guided step-by-step thing we're talking about here is that people look at stuff like that. You're absolutely right. The number of times I've heard platform X doesn't support automation, platform Y doesn't support Acme, and they released it to no fanfare in a point release of some software update 6 months ago, is exactly the kind of thing where I want to encourage everybody listening to look at and go back. And again, it's this evaluation. Look at your systems, prioritize them, find out, does it support automation today? Not just what I thought 6 months ago, not what I thought 2 years ago. Have a look now and see whereabouts it falls in this grid in terms of hard or easy. And obviously the criticality is up to you.
So if you get all that done by New Year's Day, then you got 3 months, not quite 3 months, 2.5 months to get all that done. Or if you get all that done by Thanksgiving Day, then you got 3.5 months to get this done. This is when you're in testing, training, and transitioning. This is when you are doing the work. So what does this work like, right? It looks like get your automation in place, try them out, give yourself time, right? Run it early, because if there's a technical glitch and you need to turn it off while you fix the glitch and then turn it back on, you want some time to do that. So get it going early, pilot your automation workflows as early as you can, get your teams trained, actually do some renewals with it, get the automation in place and start using it. And the other benefit here is that because automation has these other benefits, it's more reliable, you're less likely to have an error, your critical human resources are spending less time on this and they have more time and mental energy for other things, you will get other benefits of automation anyway. So as soon as you get this implemented, the sooner it is implemented, the sooner you start getting those benefits. If you can have a system up and running in January or in December, have it up and running in December. Good for you, right? If you can have it up and running in September, have it up and running in September. Good for you. You will get those benefits in the meantime, and you will be confident that the system is reliable and solid, and you will iron out any kinks that you find.
Absolutely. There is one thing I do want to say there on that. So a couple of other points, but one big bold one I want to say is certainly for us, and I'm sure for any of the other CAs that anybody listening might do business with, is these short lifetime certs are available today, right? You don't have to wait until March to get your 200-day certificate. We're giving you the deadlines. We're giving you a guide of when we think you should do these things by, and when would be good to get them done. But you can have certificates today. We have subscribers doing short lifetime certificates. We have a lot of people doing 90-day. We have a lot of people doing less. I've spoken to a couple of subscribers just this week who want to try testing today, this year, this month, with 47-day certificates. And why not? You don't have to wait. I think that's a really good point to make, because this is all good. We're giving really good advice. We're giving a really good guide as best we think these things should be done. But it isn't hard and fast to the point that you can't do this until the deadlines. You can absolutely get short lifetime certs today. Many people have, thankfully. I wish there were more, and I encourage more people to try it. So if you're ready, if you have a part of your system, part of your infrastructure with automation today, and you feel like you could try that on a short lifetime cert down as low as 47 days, ask your CA. I am near certain they will do it, and you will be able to test that, and you will feel
yourself
confident
on a monthly cadence. Absolutely.
you're ready for the future. Absolutely.
And at least we can, right? If your CA can't do it, then we'll take care of you.
Yeah, we can do that. Training's another good point I just wanted to make, Tim, as well, because
Go ahead.
Training, and we don't have the word here education, but a big thing in this, with this short lifetime cert, there's a lot of changes coming in our industry. You and I do the Pulse webinar every quarter, and we talk about all the changes coming up. We will both admit there's a lot more changes this year than there were the last few years, and we know there's more coming. So I think that idea of training and education, get people to understand that certificates and automation, it's not what it was perhaps the last time your team touched it 1, 2, 5, 10 years ago. Right? It's the same product, it's the same TLS, it's the same X509 and all that good stuff, but it has changed. The automation, the lifetime, the rules and requirements around it has changed. So that training, that education, I think is critical to make sure everybody is aware. You've got to think, if people are doing automation and they expect that a certificate they get next week with an Acme client is going to be identical to one they did manually with VeriSign back in 2006, they're in for a real shock. And that might need some education to get people to understand these differences and make sure that people are trained and educated that these changes are happening.
Yeah, and so at the risk of belaboring a little, I think this ties into a broader theme that we've seen a lot, that Nick and I talk about a lot on the Pulse webinar, that we talk about a lot on the Root Causes podcast, is the idea that the old static web PKI is a thing of the past. This idea that I'm going to learn something when I'm in school and still be doing it 15 years later is not how it will ever be ever again. And we're in a new world where we require crypto agility, we require certificate agility, we require flexible, evolving PKI systems and practices. And if you don't do that, you're exposing yourself to breach and outage and compliance failures and SLA failures and other things that are really bad. And we all have to wrap our heads around the idea that we're not going to work in a world anymore where I can rely on the fact that I can do the exact same thing that I did 5 years ago.
Exactly.
And I certainly can't rely on the fact that I'm going to do the exact same thing I did 10 years ago. You should assume you're not going to be. And that is our world now. And not everyone's happy about that, but it's not avoidable. It's the reality we have. And let's embrace it and lean into it. There are opportunities for gains and better practices as a consequences of the things we have to do anyway. And either way, we have to do these things anyway.
Absolutely. Great point, Tim. I think that's it. It's not the industry it used to be, and people need to understand and be prepared for that. I think that's a simplified version of the message. Absolutely.
All right. So March 15, 2026 is not the end. It is the first stage. So let's look at this. And this is worth going over. So we'll take a couple minutes to go over this because this is interesting. The ballot is actually going to work on 3 different things. It's going to work on the maximum term of a public TLS certificate. It's also going to work on the maximum reuse period for domain control validation. I will explain what that means. So set that aside, and it will work on the maximum reuse period for organization validation. I will also explain what that means. But let's start by looking at the certificate term. So today, the maximum term you can have is 398 days. It's 1 year plus a month, essentially. And that's to give us a little bit of extra. Think of it as a year plus a little bit. And what that means is you can be on a yearly cadence, and if you have to renew something a little late because there's a technical glitch and you have to go hit it the next time you're in the office, or if you want to renew something a little early because you just want to get it done, there's flexibility for all of that without breaking your cadence. The same is going to be true for all of these other step downs. So March 15, 2026 200 days. That's a funny number. What is 200 days? Well, 200 days is 6 months plus a little bit. And when you start thinking about it that way, now it makes great sense. Because I can go on a 6-month cadence. So I'm going to do this. I'm making this up. February 15 and August 15, right? And that's my 6-monthly cadence or whatever. When we roll down to March 15, 2027, now what's 100 days? 100 days is 3 months plus a little bit. So now instead of February, August, it's February, May, August, November, right? Same idea. And then 2 years later, March 15, 2029, note the 2 years later in there, that's where we drop down to 47 days. Well, what is 47 days? 47 days is 1 month plus a little bit. So now imagine yourself on a monthly cadence. So I'm doing it the second Tuesday of every month. And, you know, sometimes that's 30 days and sometimes it's 31. Occasionally it's 28 and very occasionally it's 29. I don't really worry about that, right? And if there's a problem with the automation that didn't work and someone rolls into the office on Monday and said, hey, oh my God, these certs didn't update. I got to go fix that manually while I figure out what's wrong. You can do that and you didn't have an expiration because it's 47 days, right? And that's what this is built to reflect. And it's very explicitly intended to enable us as IT professionals to get on that kind of cadence and have a predictable time frame where we're expecting our certs to be renewed.
I think on this, Tim, as well, the other thing we probably need to talk about briefly is the other reuse periods, specifically DCV.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah,
probably
so
good to talk a little about that with
Let's move on
automation.
to DCV. So DCV is domain control validation. This is how you as the subscriber prove that you control this domain. And there's a variety of methods. We're not getting into them in this webinar today. But there is a sense of what we call a domain control validation reuse period. And what this means, if you think about it, it'll make perfect sense. If I go and I order, I want to get 7 certs from you. So I go order cert number 1, and I go order cert number 2, and I order cert number 3, etc. I don't want to have to do DCV 7 times for the same domain. So there's an idea that within a certain period of time, we will count your DCV as valid. So if I order a cert and then I come back to get another cert tomorrow, I don't need to reuse DCV because it's just the next day, right? And that makes great sense. I think the trouble is the DCV reuse period, frankly, right now is just too long. So it's 398 days. And again, where you see this in play is do a little thought experiment with me. It goes as follows. So let's say I buy a certificate from CAA, and then the next, I get DCV done. It's perfectly valid. And then the next day, I give up control of that domain. I sell that domain to somebody. Well, I have that cert, and that cert can be done for good for up to 398 days. But perhaps more importantly, that DCV can be reused for up to 398 days. So I can come back 13 months later and buy a new cert, a new 1-year cert from that same CA, and that CA is allowed to issue me that cert without redoing DCV, and this is considered to be perfectly compliant. And then that cert can run for a year, which means it could be more than 2 years after I legitimately lost control of the domain that I am still operating a cert that is valid, that is not misissued for that domain that I don't have control for. And again, this is where people have said, you know what? No, just no. It's not okay. Got to be shorter. And so as we step down the maximum certificate term, we address the other half of that problem, which is we step down the DCV reuse period. And as you can see, it tracks all the way down to March 15, 2029. March 15, 2029, DCV reuse period collapses down to 10 days, which again is plenty of time for you to do this. Oh, I need to get 3 certs, but I kind of got to do something between them and can't get them all at the same instant. Solves that problem, but it also solves the problem of making sure that DCV is current.
Exactly. I think it's good to note that DCV thing because we talk about automation and we talk about all the solutions. A big part of that is the automation of this DCV process as well. And that's one of the reasons we are strong supporters of Acme, for example,
Yeah.
because that has
Yes.
the whole thing of certificate automation alongside DCV automation put together. But I think this is another critical part for people to look at when they're doing that evaluation and they're doing that assessment and they're doing the discovery. What domains am I issuing for? Do I have automation of the DCV processes? Because as this chart says, and as Tim's just perfectly explained, when we get to March 2029, you're going to have to revalidate your domain every 10 days, probably slightly less than that, probably once a week, if you haven't fully automated it to happen as part of every certificate request, which is certainly an option as well. So a process you currently do today, once a year, to say, yes, this is my domain name, I control it, and go through the method of doing that, that is now going to have to be repeated probably on a weekly basis by 2029.
Yeah.
Have to be prepared
Yep.
for that, have to be ready to automate that process as well.
And
So this
you really
means
want that automated.
and I'll summarize that and kind of
Excuse
pass
me.
it off to another group of people. I'll say speak to your DNS providers about that one.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah,
DNS
yeah.
does have automation, it does have APIs, but the DNS teams and DNS organizations are the people that can help with those. So that is
Yeah.
something else that you need to look at as well.
And then the last thing, just in the interest of completeness, real quick, is OV, organization validation, is how we determine, this is the name of my company and this is where I'm located and that stuff. And right now that's allowed to go on for more than 2 years. And as part of this proposal, that's also taking that down. It's got to be done once a year. There is a sense that organizations do not change ownership and name nearly as frequently as something like a domain can. And that once a year is a great kind of cadence to be on. That's what we enforce anyway at Sectigo. So if you're a Sectigo customer, you've been getting yearly OV anyway, whether you know it or not. And this is going to be required for the whole industry.
The OV and the EV timeline isn't changing, and I think that's one of these other kind of parts, like kind of concessions almost in this step down. Because the key thing to notice, and I will say, Tim, when people talk about the DCV reuse period going down and how often they have to validate it, we've certainly seen people ask the question, well, why do I need to revalidate it any more frequently than a year? I buy my domain name for a year. And you make a good point. Domain names can be lost, stolen, exchanged, sold, and transferred hands. But the other thing I've suggested that people bear in mind is a certificate is really just an attestation that somebody controls a cryptographic key and a fully qualified domain name at the same time. Right?
Yes.
So it's an attestation at that point in time.
Yeah.
So to have that valid for your example is perfect of almost, over 26 months, over 2 years, that single momentary attestation can be carried through to the entire world. Bear in mind, these are publicly trusted certs that work on the browsers of everybody's computer on the planet. For 26 months off that one very short attestation is obviously a big security risk. So the reason this is coming down is to make sure that when certificates are issued to a given fully qualified domain name, that action, that verification is fresh, it's current, it's recent, it's 10 days or less old, and therefore it can be relied on and trusted.
Yeah. Yep. So going forward, since you're going to be automating both your certificate deployment and your DCV anyway, this is the time to have a truly certificate agile environment. Here we wrote some things here: continuous monitoring, never letting your certificate management fall off your radar. Like, this is the time to do that. If you're doing that anyway, have a modern, agile, automated, reliable, employee-friendly certificate environment. And you're going to be most of the way there anyway. So how do you do this? Well, there are some public standards you definitely want to consider. Acme, Nick already talked to, right? Acme is the most universally used of these by far. And again, it's not perfect, but Acme support may be more than you think. There's some other standards you can use, like EST and SCEP, that are also potentially available. There may be various APIs that are available for you to use. All of these things, for instance, we make available to our own customers using our SCM platform.
Yeah, I think Acme is the one that we talk about a lot, Tim, and I said earlier, because that has very much a focus on what we're talking about, public TLS certificates. The APIs can be used to provision other types of certs, and SCEP and EST are kind of almost internal and maybe client side certificates. But ACME is the one that rolls in this domain validation and everything else. And the one thing I wanted to say about ACME is, with it being an open standard, publicly documented, RFC 8555. There are many, many clients to choose from. Okay. So if someone says, what ACME clients, we have a list of some that we recommend, and there's some that we use, and there's some that we know work, but there are thousands of clients, thousands of software libraries that support ACME. And a lot of native software, like we talked about before, vendors are building ACME clients in because it's a good open standard, and there are many, many options to choose from. So we provide at Sectigo, obviously, a standard ACME service. I'm sure all the other CAs provide that, and pretty much any client that's available that follows that standard, which is relatively simple and concise, it's not overly complex, will work. So I think that's probably a good recommendation for people to look at initially, is if you could use ACME, if you have ACME support, go for that. But certainly there are other options out there, using APIs, using kind of native software agents and other integrations. But these are the things that we certainly support, and I think most other CAs support, in terms of being the tip of the spear to get this automation done.
Yep. And also you need to consider CLM. So I don't want to turn this into an SCM commercial. We can have that conversation another time if you want. But CLM as a category, whether it's Sectigo Certificate Manager or something else, really, really, really is the right solution here. So you can get a CLM platform, and what it will do is it will automate all these things we're talking about, right? It'll find your certs, it'll discover them, you'll have them in a dashboard where you can see them, you can set them for auto renewal, and you can even push them down and have them automatically installed much or most of the time. And this, this is, once you're going down the automation road, you really want to consider a full-fledged CLM.
This is it. I think we've talked about before, Tim, you and I, we've said, oh, look, this is very different landscape and a very different industry than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And I think CLM is really a good illustration of that, because certainly when, you and I started in this industry, the general, the term CLM wasn't necessarily coined. It was there in maybe some vague pieces. CLM as being able to buy a piece of software, a solution, a service, a package to do all of your certificate management didn't really exist. I would argue it may not have even been necessary in some cases in the past because of the lower volume of multi-year certificates people could get. But this is the key now, right? Especially if you handle more than a couple of certificates in some kind of control panel you're used to, you need a tool like this. You need to use it to find what you have, manage what you have, notifications, expiries, getting new certificates, APIs, automation, all the good sales stuff that we happily have armies of people that will deal with. But this is the solution, and it's because it's not always been something that's been immediately apparent to people, certainly not in the past. But CLM, certificate lifecycle management, is what you need to look at to get you through these changes.
I was just going to say, I think it's not actually written out anywhere on this slide, but CLM stands for Certificate Lifecycle Management. All right. So shameless plug. If you were interested in what we talked about today, I want to urge you to consider subscribing to the Root Causes podcast. This is run by me and one of Nick's and my associates here at Sectigo, and we have new episodes every week. We're approaching our 500th episode, and we talk about all matters of digital certificates, PKI, encryption, PQC, trust models, etc., etc. So come join us and hear lots of in-depth conversations about things in the PKI world. We also have a survival guide for you. So if you want more detail on the kind of thing that we laid out today, you can come get the survival guide. You see at sectigo.com/47day SSL and get all of this for your future reference. And with that, I believe, Leah, we're ready for questions.
Brilliant. Yes, and we've had quite a lot. There was a couple of questions. They all kind of were centered around a similar theme around how is it going to impact operation costs of certificate renewals? What's going to happen to pricing?
Yeah, right. So I get this a lot. When this first came up, people started to say, oh, 90-day certificates. That means I'm going to pay 4 times as much for SSL, right? No, I mean, what'll happen is the market will adjust appropriately. And I don't think there's anyone who realistically thinks that though everyone out in the market should be paying the same amount of money for a 47-day cert as they did for a 398-day cert. And so we don't have this pricing there today because all the CAs haven't gone and made this change yet. But my feedback is expect to pay what you're paying now. Don't expect to pay more. It'll all get adjusted, and expect to pay what you're paying now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to make, Tim. And I've had the same question and given a very similar answer. Is that just because you're doing this process of getting a new certificate 4 times a year, 5 times a year, 12 times a year, doesn't mean the price is going to go up by that much. You've got to think the current certificates we offer today are a certificate for a price for a period of time, a year generally, or less.
Yep.
And so if you have the same certificate, but only for 47 days, it doesn't have quite the same value. But I think what you'll see is, firstly, you'll see CAs move towards kind of a subscription model. I know, we're certainly looking at that so that you can have an annual cost and you can get all the certificates you need for domain names or all the number of certificates you have today covered. I think that's one thing to look at. The other thing I will say when someone has asked me this question is look back at what happened before. We've been through these changes before. We've been from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 years. And each time the price of a 1 year of certificate has not significantly changed from any of the CAs. It has not gone, when we went from 5 years down to 4, the price increased. When we went from 5 years to where we are today at 1, there is not a 5 times increase in the cost of certificates historically. There just isn't. So you can look back at that and you can make some assumptions about how it will go forward. And I think you're right to say, Tim, it'll be very similar or the same cost as today. There is no chance that this is going to be 5, 7, 12 times the cost.
If you do have a CA who seems to think they can nick you for 12 times the money, then you probably just want to get a different CA.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, next.
Great. A little bit of a longer one. With certificate life cycles being reduced to just 47 days, does it increase the operational burden on smaller businesses? And also, as a side question, could this lead to someone to forgo proper certificate management altogether or even default to HTTP over
yes,
HTTPS?
absolutely. Right. So if you're doing this manually and you're provisioning, installing, and tracking these certificates, and you're doing all of this in your spreadsheet and you're doing it manually, then you just increased your workflow 12-fold.
Yeah.
Right.
I think the other thing to say, Tim, is there is going to be, a small burden for a lot of organizations to get them automated initially. And it's an initial bump to get over in the road. There is an initial effort to do the evaluation, do the steps we talked about, get the automation set up. Once that is done, it's a case of let it run and monitor it. Right. So your burden is very front loaded. Any work that has to be done is front loaded. I think to answer a couple of points in that question, Leah, about smaller organizations and things like that. Yes, I think, there are potentially smaller organizations that will have a bigger burden because they perhaps don't have a bigger IT team, certainly don't have a PKI team. They maybe don't have like DevOps or operations. I think the CLMs we talked about can certainly help there. I think the integrations for various vendors will also help. They'll start building automation in to make it easier.
Yep.
I think you'll also see a bit of a shift, perhaps in some cases, towards more managed services. If you're running a website today and you're running it on a server that you have, sat under a desk in someone's office, and you have to manage certs on that, maybe it's time to reassess that.
Maybe it's time to host.
To a hosted provider who will handle all the automation and the security and the updates for you. The final point I just wanted to mention on the HTTP and HTTPS thing, I don't think that's an option today. I mean, historically, certainly someone could opt out of a certificate. They go, I don't care. I'm not going to buy one. I'm going to use a self-signed cert. I'm going to use no certificate at all. The reality is in 2025, you cannot have a website or a web service that operates without a certificate. We talked about the
modern
expiries
browsers to connect. There needs to be a certificate, or they're just going to block you off. Yeah,
exactly. Your mobile apps won't work if they don't get a trusted, valid, functional certificate. Tim said your browser won't work. You'll get errors. Your customers will get errors on the website. So I don't think we'll see people opting out of this because that's like opting out of being able to do business. They're opting out of having a web presence or doing e-commerce. So it'll probably mean there's more of a move towards managed services. And certainly there will be an initial burden on all orgs to get the automation done. But as we said right at the start of this is for security of everybody. These certificates are relied upon by everyone, and we need to make everybody safer.
And Nick, once that automation is done, what happens is now it's yielding dividends. You should think of it as an investment that yields dividends. And so, yeah, you'll have a front-loaded work cost, but when that's done, you will get more time back perpetually from there on out. And in the long run, you'll actually come out ahead. Okay, next.
Cool. If we order certificates on March 14th, 2026, that have the 398-day lifespan, will those certificates still be valid on March 15th,
Yes.
2026?
Absolutely. So sorry for not making that clear. This is certificates issued as of that date. Any certificate issued prior to that is compliant for the full maximum term for the rules that were in place at that time. So yes, if you were to order a 398-day cert on March 14, 2026, that cert would be good for the full 398 days.
And then I think a very similar question that says, even if DCV is not renewed, then will the present certificate still be valid till expiration?
Let's
Yes.
clarify that too. And sorry, I didn't clarify that either. This DCV reuse period, and I'm going to go back to that slide, this is what DCV occurs when the certificate is issued. Nobody is saying after March 15, 2029, that for your existing certificate, you're going to have to go back every 10 days and prove that you still have the domain. That is not what will occur. What will occur is you will have to prove that when you get that cert, and then that cert will be good for up to 47 days. But if you want to get another cert, if it's more than 10 days later, you redo DCV at that time.
These changes, I think, unlike some other ones that we might have seen in the industry, and again, I think, Tim, this is one of the reasons people do get confused. This change isn't going to affect like currently valid certificates. So when we move over to the 200 days, 100 days, the 47, great example in the question, Leah, is if you issue the cert the day before for the full lifetime and it's reduced the day after, nothing changes. That cert will live out its lifetime. Obviously, caveat subject to it not being revoked by you or the keys compromised or something like that. External circumstances, they might happen. But otherwise, that 398-day cert issued the day before the deadline is going to live out its lifetime. There's no looking back and revoking stuff like that. That's just not going to happen for this change.
Great. Is there a change to the root CA certificate terms?
At the moment, no. This is only talking about leaf certificates that we've talked about, or we call them leaf certificates, subscriber certificates, end entity certificates, the ones that you acquire from your CA. Now, as I said earlier, and Tim's mentioned as well, the change of pace in the industry is increasing, certainly what it was several years ago. And there's a number of other changes coming in, part of Google's requirements, Apple's, and just tab forum changes altogether. One of those is actually a kind of more frequent rotation of root and intermediate certificates. Exactly what those durations are going to be, it could be as low as 5 years, it could be 12 years, but I certainly don't think we can expect to see roots lasting kind of 20 or 30 years like they may have done before. Now, that shouldn't be a problem because, again, any client any browser or software relying on a publicly trusted certificate really needs to be something like a browser that gets updated at least once a month. It has a list of all the trusted CAs that gets updated as frequently. So I think I'll just pull back very quickly to that point I made earlier, that if you're concerned about the change of pace of, say, root certificates, even if that goes to like 5 to 7 years, then I would argue it's very likely that whatever system you're concerned about is not a good candidate for a public certificate. It's a good candidate for, private CA or something like that. But if you don't have a piece of software like a browser that's updated every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks with its trust store, with its TLS library and everything else, perhaps it's a better candidate for a private CA instead. So the lifetime isn't reduced just yet on those, but I think it's something else to take into account when you're evaluating whether your system should have a public or a private cert.
Brilliant. And I think we'll finish on one probably applicable question because we do have a couple others. Who would I need to contact if I have additional questions from someone at Sectigo?
I think the main answer is going to be your account manager. If you have an account manager, reach out to them. If you don't, absolutely reach out to our sales or even our support organization.
And contact me form
get
and
through to
on our
somebody that will help.
website. Yeah, but yeah, if you know your account manager, you have a relationship with an account manager, it's definitely the right place to start.
Brilliant. Yeah. And any outstanding questions, somewhere very specific to specific accounts, we'll get back to you separately.
Excellent.
But as we're at the full hour, thank you everyone for your time, and thanks Nick and Tim. Any more questions, like they said, do get in touch with us, either the contact us form or to your account manager. We also have another webinar coming up in 2 weeks centering around the ROI of the certificate lifecycle management platform. And you can sign up via our website. We continue to add new webinars. So yeah, we'd love to see you there. For now, thank you and have a good rest of your day.